How the hell y'all doing today? This is the Freedom Club podcast, and I am your very grateful, very thankful, very excited host, Curt Mercadante, but you probably already knew that. Thank you so much for being here, whether this is your first time listening or your 171st time listening. I'm so happy you are here. Month after month, our audience continues to grow, and I'm so fulfilled about that. Because if I can just help one person decide to commit to make a positive change in their life, to live a life of freedom and fulfillment, then I've done my job. So thanks so much for being here. Thank you for spreading the word, for sharing this podcast on your social media channels. Listen, if you like this podcast, if you like what you hear week after week, episode after episode, please head to iTunes. Leave us a positive rating and review. Those are so important to us. They help to expand our audience around the globe. So I thank you in advance for doing that. Now, on today's episode, I answer a question submitted by Sarah. She's a member of the Freedom Club community, my private Facebook group. As you know, episode after episode, I invite you to go to Facebook and become a member of the Freedom Club community. I live stream these episodes. I live stream my interviews with our Wednesday podcast guests. You can participate in those live, ask questions as they're happening. So I hope you'll join the Freedom Club community. In today's episode, I answer a question from Sarah, who asks, Curt, what are 3 lessons you wish you would have learned years earlier? Great question, Sarah. And I do my best to answer that in today's episode.
Welcome to the Freedom Club podcast, where we strive to pull you out of your life of quiet desperation, out of your comfort zone of misery, and propel you into a life of freedom and fulfillment. And now, here's your host for this journey, international speaker and coach, and serial entrepreneur, Curt Mercadante.
So Sarah asks, what are 3 lessons you wish you would have learned years earlier? Thanks for that question, Sarah. So 3 questions I wish I would have learned earlier. I think one relates to college. And I feel a little guilty. You know, my parents put me through college. My dad, his father was a trolley driver, didn't make much money, saved up all his money and put my dad through the University of Notre Dame, paid for the whole thing. Now that was in the 40s, right? So college costs were a little bit different then, but my dad had it in his mind that he was going to do the same for me, and he did so. Now, again, that was 20-something years ago, so again, costs were much lower. But I think a lot of people, and I think this myth is being shattered, the myth that you need that piece of paper to be successful, free, and fulfilled in your life. And I think it's absolute bullshit. And I think thousands of people are learning that. All these people who have racked up debt, either for themselves or their family, or student loan debt. And now they're talking about forgiving that student loan debt, which means each and every one of us in the United States is going to be footing the bill for this, for the myth that you have that piece of paper and it will guarantee you a job. How many people out there have gotten that piece of paper and are out of work? How many people out there have gotten that piece of paper? They were told by well-meaning people, well, you got to go and you got to major in finance. And then when you get out, you got to get a job here. And then you got to live in a certain neighborhood, get a certain car. And then they get to 40 or 45 and they're like, I'm not happy at all. I'm not fulfilled. They're living a life still at age 45 that they were told they should live or were supposed to live from age 15, maybe earlier. Hell, we have kindergartens in this country canceling theater programs because they're not college ready enough. And so we treat these people like robots through a schooling system that was developed for the Industrial Revolution, that was actually based on the Prussian military. And so we're turning out these robots to get that piece of paper, and they don't have jobs anyways. And if they do get jobs, they're not fulfilled. And as my friend Don Wettrick at the Started Up Foundation asks, they're thinking about the best ways to prepare our kids for the future, but no one's asking the question, what does the future even look like? Are we pushing people to get these college degrees for jobs that won't exist? I was going to say 5 or 10 years, even 1 year from now. And so I wish a lesson, listen, I majored in political science. All the important things I learned in college, I learned from my jobs and working in college. A professor had a think tank. I worked for that. I went to DC. I went to New York. I interned. That's where I really learned how to do what I needed to do. Did I need that degree to get my first job? Yes. But again, that's an input. You need the degree to get a job. Why? No one's asking why. My good friend Isaac Morehouse, who's been on the Freedom Club podcast, he's got a startup called Praxis. It's an apprenticeship startup. You can go there, you participate in a boot camp for 6 months, and the other 6 months, startups, I think they got like 90 something startups or something, compete for you to work for them. And at the end, they have a 98% placement rate. You can get a job 50, 60 grand. And you know why these startups like it? Because they don't have to retrain people who spent 4 years hooking up, getting drunk, maybe learning something. Instead, they got people who come out with actual skills, with creativity. They know how to work. They know how to get up in the morning and work and do actual things rather than having to retrain someone who spent 4 years racking up 6 figures of debt to do what? Now, there are still some companies and a lot of industries that are focused on that college degree. You see a lot of chambers of commerce around the country, and they're still focused on what? The militarized industrial revolution model of schooling our children. And I say schooling, I don't say education, because there is a difference between school and education. And a lot of folks are focused on the input of schooling without really asking, how can we truly educate our kids? And when I say educate our kids, I say, let's focus on the outcomes of what that actually means. Not, well, what's the focus? Well, getting them into college. That's still an input. Why do we want them to get into college? Well, they get a good job. Okay. Is getting them into college and getting that degree going to get them that good job? Well, maybe. They might have a higher chance of getting a good job if they get there. All right. Is getting that good job really the outcome, or is that an input? And then keep looking at, and what is the actual outcome? I would say is living a life of fulfillment. Right? Not just churning out robots, but living a life of fulfillment. Does that include making money? 100%. Absolutely. But when we look at paycheck and only value ourselves as paycheck providers, I talk about this all the time. You get to 40, 45, 50, and you have that sense, what the hell is it all about? Do you want to live a life of regret or a life of fulfillment? Does that include making enough money to purchase the things that give you fulfillment? Absolutely, 100%. But it's all about alignment. And so, Sarah, back to your point, one of those lessons is, and I think a lot of people are learning this hard lesson now, is that the goal is the college degree, and that will guarantee success and fulfillment down the line. It's total BS. Total BS. So what's another lesson I've learned over the years that I wish I learned earlier? And I think that is that everything is black and white, and that you need a good amount of dogma in your life. And I don't want to say a good amount. Listen, I have core values and beliefs that are unshakable. That is important. But the amount of things that I see as black and white versus nuance, I think over the last 3 or 4 years, as I've broken free to a life of freedom and fulfillment, I think that's increased. I'm a lot more curious now than I used to be. You know, this notion, when I came out of college, man, I was arrogant. I knew it all. And I didn't always listen to my mentors, to my bosses, to the people I worked with. I thought I knew it all. And man, over time, I realized through some failures that humbled me that I don't. And so I like to always be curious. I like to always be in a learning state, always be in a state of being the student. Because every single day, no matter how much I think I know, I learn something new. But to learn something new, you have to be open to learning it. And so I don't think in terms of dogma, except for certain values that I have, whether they're religious, spiritual. I have some political values that I have. I don't want to say political. They're more economic type values, right? But on the political side, my goodness, as many of you know, I worked in politics for years. And now I'm kind of like a pox on all their houses. And that's why I do what I do now, to get that sense of personal freedom and fulfillment. You don't have to have an opinion about everything. You don't have to take sides on every single thing. And when you start thinking in terms of nuance and thinking in terms of, well, maybe I can learn something today, that is a key component of the freedom lifestyle. When you don't think you know anything, when you are always curious. So, Sarah, that's another lesson I've learned over the years. So what's a third lesson? Sarah asked a third lesson. And by the way, I don't prep for these questions as I answer them, so you're kind of getting them off the cuff here or as I go. I think a third lesson I've learned goes back to what I talk about often, and I talked about a little earlier in this live stream, which is the notion that you've got to grind yourself in the ground to be successful. And that, I worked in politics for years, and there was an old saying, I can tell if it's a political campaign that's going to win by whether or not the light's on Sunday mornings and, lights on at 10:30 at night. And you know what that type of attitude breeds? Is people hanging around the office eating pizza, drinking till 10:30. They're not actually accomplishing anything. And it goes back to that notion that people fit a 3-hour workday into a 12 to 14-hour workday. And I like to call it hustle and grind porn. Sleep when you're dead. You got to grind yourself into the ground. Rise and grind. You got to rise and grind. You got to know what the grind is. You can work. Doug Holt, who I had on this podcast last year, said, listen, you can work hard while working smart. I work my ass off, but I only work 12 hours a week. Doesn't mean I'm doing nothing. Doesn't mean my days aren't full. I fill my days up with things that fulfill me. But you know what? I work equally as hard or harder on my relationships, on my self-care as I do at work. I get as pumped up every morning about the outcomes I have at the gym, about, I might have an outcome like I did yesterday of teaching my son piano as I do of closing sales in that day. That keeps my life aligned, not balanced. It keeps my life aligned. And so for so many years, to Sarah's question, I was under the belief that you had to grind, think about work all the time. I tell many people, even though I worked from home for many years and I had great income, I was miserable. I was overwhelmed. I worked from home and I wouldn't see my wife and kids. I would get up early in the morning. I would go up into my home office. I would come down for dinner. After dinner, I would head back up into the office. I'd come down at like 4 a.m. I'd go to sleep for a few hours. I'd get up and I'd do it all over again. And I thought that was necessary to get it done. I constantly had that feeling of anxiety, of paranoia, that if I didn't do that, the house of cards was going to fold. And it was a house of cards because I was building it on bullshit inputs rather than on key outcomes. It's a key plank of my coaching programs. Leading a radically outcomes-focused life is one of the 5 pillars of the freedom lifestyle. And so learning that has made a huge part of the difference in my life. So those are the 3 lessons that I wish I would have learned years earlier. Listen, I had to go through it. I had to deal with those things to learn it. Now that I know it, one of the aims and one of the reasons I coach is to help people learn it without having to go through the shit. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't face resilience in our life, pressure makes diamonds and all that. But there's some people who are 40, 45 who have been living it for 15 years, and I want to help them get out of that and build that runway to transition to the freedom lifestyle as soon as possible. So thanks, Sarah, for your question.